A can of tomatoes, a pound of ground meat, 20 minutes on the clock, except she had it on the table in 10 because she knew exactly which steps to skip and which ones you never could. That knowledge left the kitchen the day she did. Here are 60 forgotten 10-minute suppers that have disappeared from American kitchens. Egg salad with sweet pickle relish was the batch-made lunch that carried families through hot summers, last-minute picnics, and quick work breaks. You boiled up some eggs, peeled them, chopped them, mixed in mayo, sweet pickle relish, a little salt and pepper, and scooped the whole thing onto soft sandwich bread or rolls. It was creamy, tangy, and came together fast, especially if the eggs were boiled ahead of time. Old cookbooks loved this one because it was practical, frugal, and ready in under 10 minutes if you planned right. It filled up hungry bellies when grocery money was tight, and kids happily took it to school tucked in wax paper wraps. Some folks dressed it up with celery or paprika, but the sweet pickle relish was the real shortcut, adding just enough kick to brighten up plain eggs and mayo. You would find this recipe in faded lunchbox guides, community cookbooks, or scribbled on note cards in kitchen drawers. It might not win awards today, but back then, it was one of those quick, comforting lunches that kept families fed when every dollar counted. Burgundy stew was the Sunday dinner centerpiece at churches where immigrant families brought old-world cooking traditions to American fellowship halls. Tough cuts of beef were browned in batches, then simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes in a rich broth deepened with tomato paste and whatever wine the family could spare. The long cooking time transformed cheap, sinewy meat into fork-tender pieces that fell apart at the slightest pressure. Churchwomen would start the stew Saturday evening, letting it simmer through the night so flavors could meld and deepen by Sunday morning. The aroma would fill entire church basements, drawing families toward the fellowship hall before services even ended. What made Burgundy stew meaningful was how it turned patience into flavor and economy into abundance. A single pot could feed 30 people, with crusty bread for sopping up the rich gravy. This was immigrant cooking adapted for American congregations, proving that old traditions found new homes in church kitchens. Cornmeal mush squares were proof that mountain folks could turn the simplest ingredients into comfort. Cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt were cooked into a thick porridge at night, poured into a pan, and left to cool until firm. By morning, it's sliced clean, ready to be fried in bacon grease until crisp and golden on the outside. The inside stayed soft and creamy, making it a meal that worked hot or cold, plain or with a drizzle of syrup. It was food that didn't spoil fast, didn't cost much, and didn't need anything fancy to taste right. Even when cupboards were bare, there was always cornmeal to rely on. Its smell filled the kitchen like a promise, warm and earthy, steady as the sunrise. Every bite carried the comfort of routine and the pride of making something from almost nothing. In the mountains, that was enough to keep spirits strong. American chop suey in a Tupperware bowl was the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Pasta, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever else your mom had lying around. It was not pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles were usually elbows, the meat was always overcooked, and the sauce was probably from a jar. Still, it had heart. It had the kind of comfort only a plastic lid could seal in. You would open it at lunch, and the steam would hit your face like a warm blanket that smelled like oregano. Some kids wrinkled their noses, others traded a fruit roll-up for a few bites. It was the kind of lunch that got better the longer it sat. Something about the way the noodles soaked up the sauce made it taste like home. And if it was cold, even better. You could fork it straight from the fridge and feel like a rebel. It was not Chinese, it was not Italian, it was just American. And it worked. Rice ring with creamed mushrooms was the kind of supper dish that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, but came from a 5-ingredient recipe in the back of a spiral-bound church cookbook. You would mold cooked rice, flavored with butter and maybe a bouillon cube, into a ring using a bundt pan or gelatin mold. Then you would fill the center with creamed mushrooms made from a simple white sauce and canned or fresh mushrooms sautéed in butter. It held its shape, looked impressive, and tasted warm and earthy. Dishes like this were popular for Sunday socials and women's luncheons, where the goal was to serve something filling that still had a little flair. Church ladies knew presentation mattered, especially when the ingredients were plain. Rice was cheap, mushrooms could be foraged or bought in bulk, and butter made everything feel a bit more special. This was a dish that traveled well, reheated easily, and made just enough fuss to feel intentional without being fussy. You could feed a dozen people without breaking a sweat, or your grocery budget. And if there was any left, it was even better the next day. Who says you need apples to make an apple pie? Not the Depression era, folks, that's for sure. This mock apple pie was a genius hack that used Ritz crackers as the crust and a sweet, sticky filling made from sugar, cinnamon, and water. It was a budget-friendly dessert that satisfied the sweet tooth without the need for expensive or hard-to-find ingredients. Plus, it was a great way to use up those stale crackers lurking in the back of your pantry. The Ritz mock apple pie became a Depression-era favorite, despite the fact that it was a pastry imposter. How did it work? The aromatic mixture of sugar, cinnamon, butter, lemon juice, and crackers combined to convince the taster's senses that the pie actually tasted of apples. Mock apple pie actually dates to the mid-1800s. During the wintertime, when apples were scarce and dried apple stores were used up, inventive home cooks would instead use soda crackers or stale bread. The more modern Ritz cracker version came about in the 1930s. French bread pizza was not just a meal, it was an event. Every kid in the 1980s knew the thrill of seeing a halved loaf of crusty French bread slathered in red sauce, buried under gooey mozzarella, and dotted with slices of pepperoni or whatever toppings you had on hand. It baked quickly, smelled incredible, and had just the right amount of crunch and chew. It felt fancier than frozen pizza, more fun than takeout, and more customizable than anything else in the freezer. The sauce came from a jar, the cheese came from a bag, and the bread came from the bakery rack at the supermarket. But when it all came together, it felt like magic. Parents loved it because it was cheap and fast. Kids loved it because it felt like something made just for them. No one argued over slices because everyone got their own half. It was a Friday night tradition, a birthday party standby, and a backup plan for when real dinner plans fell through. It may not have been elegant, but it was full of joy. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. In industrial towns across the Midwest, where wages were modest and meat was a luxury, resourceful home cooks found a clever solution to a very real problem: how to serve something that looked like chicken without actually having any. That solution was called mock chicken legs, more commonly known as city chicken. Ironically, it didn't contain a shred of poultry. Instead, it was usually made from ground pork or veal, molded onto wooden skewers to resemble drumsticks, then breaded, pan-fried, and baked. The concept took off in cities like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit during the 1930s and 40s. It offered the illusion of Sunday dinner on a Tuesday budget. But it wasn't just about appearance. It was a testament to the ingenuity born of limited options. Why serve plain meatballs when you could present them as a roast chicken leg with a little imagination and a box of toothpicks? There was no universal recipe. Families used whatever meat they could grind, whatever crumbs they had to coat, and whatever fat was left in the skillet. The goal wasn't culinary deception. It was sustenance, styled with just enough flair to lift spirits. Scotch eggs are actually a funny one. You would most commonly associate them with pub culture and Britain, right? I mean, that's how most people think of them. That's their history too. People would get off work or get a lunch break and decide to hit the local pub with the lads for a few Scotch eggs. What really are they, though? A Scotch egg is just an egg packed with protein. It's a hard-boiled or soft-boiled egg that gets this blanket of seasoned sausage meat, and nestled inside that, it gets coated in breadcrumbs, upon which it gets deep-fried until it's completely golden brown. So, yeah, it's definitely one calorically dense egg, but that also makes it perfect for work because you can carry 2 or 3 of these and they fill you up right away. The crust is exactly as crispy as you're thinking it is, by the way, and I know you're getting ideas of how succulent this must be to bite into. Let me tell you, you're right on the money. The spiced pork on the inside is something divine, and the creamy egg center just brings everything together for the perfect flavor experience. The flavors also change depending on what spices you use and what herbs you pair it with, so you can really experiment a lot with this dish. Hominy is corn soaked in an alkaline solution, wood ash, lye, or slaked lime, until the outer hull loosens and the kernel becomes something entirely different, a process called nixtamalization that the Cherokee and other Native American nations had practiced for centuries before European settlers arrived in the Appalachian Mountains and learned it from them. The alkaline treatment unlocked niacin that dried corn could not release on its own, and the settlers who adopted it kept their families healthier without knowing exactly why. By the 1950s, most Appalachian families got their hominy from a can. Van Camp's was the brand most kitchens stocked, warming it in a skillet with butter and cracked black pepper. Old-timers remembered when it was supper itself, heaped into a bowl, eaten hot enough to steam. The flavor was different from grits, blunter and chewier, and anyone who grew up eating it never confused the two. It was its own thing, and the people who understood that distinction are mostly gone. Chicken and rice soup was another lunchtime favorite of the 1950s, often coming from a can but still delivering comfort and warmth. Housewives kept shelves lined with soups because they were quick, dependable, and inexpensive, and chicken and rice was one of the most beloved varieties. It offered a lighter alternative to heavier meat dishes while still feeling nourishing. Crackers or bread often accompanied it, stretching the meal further. Children appreciated the mild flavor, while adults liked that it was easy to digest and filling enough for a midday meal. The convenience of canned soups matched the growing culture of quick cooking, where less time was spent in the kitchen but meals still needed to be hearty. Advertisements of the era leaned heavily on the promise of wholesome family meals in minutes, and chicken and rice soup was the perfect example. For countless families, a bowl of this soup represented comfort, frugality, and the reassuring taste of something simple. It remains a reminder of how mid-century America embraced both tradition and convenience. The whole point of Swiss steak was violence, controlled, deliberate, necessary violence against a cheap cut of round steak that would otherwise chew like shoe leather. Your mother laid the meat on a cutting board, pounded flour into both sides with the edge of a heavy plate or a metal meat mallet, and kept pounding until the fibers broke down and the flour worked itself deep into the grain. Then into the hot skillet it went, browned hard on both sides, before she covered it with canned tomatoes, sliced onions, and sometimes a chopped green pepper. The lid went on, and the steak braised low and slow until it surrendered, fork tender, falling apart in a thick, tomatoey sauce that was almost a gravy. The name had nothing to do with Switzerland. It came from the technique of Swissing, an industrial process of smoothing cloth between heavy rollers, which described exactly what the pounding did to the meat. A 2-pound round steak cost under $1 in 1964, and when your mother was done with it, it tasted like something that should have cost $5. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups were the lazy day lunch every kid begged for, and every parent threw together when the cupboards looked bare. You flattened a slice of white bread, laid down a piece of cheese, rolled in a hot dog, and either microwaved it or crisped it up in a pan. It was fast, cheesy, and exactly what you needed when there were hungry mouths and barely any groceries. Some folks sliced them into little bites for parties or potlucks, but most families just ate them whole with a squirt of mustard or ketchup on the side. These roll-ups showed up in almost every old-school cookbook under quick meals or lunches for kids because they made one pack of hot dogs stretch a long way. You could make a whole tray of them in minutes, which is why this quirky little lunch became a go-to when time and money were both running low. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, and that is what counted. Crackling bread was the cornbread that announced hog-killing season at rural churches, made with crispy pork skin bits folded into the batter. When families butchered their yearly hogs, the fat was rendered into lard, leaving behind brown, crunchy cracklings too flavorful to discard. Churchwomen mixed these directly into cornmeal batter, creating bread that was simultaneously crispy, chewy, and intensely savory, with each bite containing surprises of pork richness. The bread was baked in cast-iron skillets, preheated with lard until smoking, developing a crust that shattered between teeth before giving way to tender interior. At church suppers, following community hog killings, crackling bread appeared alongside beans, greens, and every part of the pig transformed into supper. What made this bread special was its connection to self-sufficiency and the satisfaction of using everything the animal provided. The smell of crackling bread baking meant winter was coming, and the community had prepared together. Pinto bean patties turned humble leftovers into something hearty enough to carry through a day's labor. When supper's beans cooled on the stove, the next morning they would be mashed, mixed with cornmeal or flour, and fried into small cakes. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, they held together just enough to slide between slices of bread for an easy sandwich. Cold or warm, it did not matter. They tasted like thrift and care, proof that nothing in a hillbilly kitchen ever went to waste. You could spice them if you had the means, but even plain, they had a comfort all their own. Some said the flavor deepened overnight, as if the beans remembered the smoke from last night's fire. These patties were food for people who understood how to make plenty out of scraps, and they did it with pride. A jar of pickles on the side turned it into a full meal, simple but whole, just like the folks who made it. Mock chicken legs, often called city chicken, were one of the more creative illusions that came out of old church kitchens. You would take cubes of pork or veal, thread them onto wooden skewers, bread them like fried chicken, and then either fry or bake them. They had nothing to do with chicken except for the fact that they kind of looked like a drumstick when you picked one up. This dish became a hit in the Rust Belt during the 1930s and 1940s, when chicken was actually more expensive than pork. Polish and Slovak communities took to it quickly, and so did the churches they were part of. You would find the recipe in all kinds of regional cookbooks from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. These were especially common at church picnics, potlucks, and summer weddings, where trays of chicken legs would come out hot and crispy. Some cooks dipped them in gravy, others just served them plain with mashed potatoes and green beans. They were easy to make in big batches and tasted even better the next day. Church ladies loved that. It was thrifty, it was fun, and it made folks smile when they realized the chicken was not chicken at all. By now, we're talking about somewhere along the 70s. America's always been a big fan of cream. There's really no denying that, but I would say that we've warmed up to mushrooms a lot more than we used to. I don't think they were not popular, but they weren't exactly a standout ingredient that would be making anyone's top 10 or top 5 either. Americans were changing their palates regarding mushrooms thanks to two things, though. One, they had built up a fondness for it thanks to how many Americans, especially ones living on the edges of urban hubs, relied on foraging wild mushrooms. Two, things like cream soups, such as cream of mushroom soups, were already making the pairing of cream and mushrooms popular. This take on puff pastry wasn't exactly a long shot, since the stage was pretty much mostly set. However, I think most people have opted for things like sandwiches and ordering takeout at lunch now, or just getting a coffee. Work culture's really changed, and having a full-fledged meal during your 15-minute break isn't the most appealing option to a lot of people nowadays. Salisbury steak TV dinners were the one microwave meal that felt like a real supper, at least through the eyes of a hungry kid. The beef patties were tenderish, floating in thick brown gravy next to a scoop of mashed potatoes and a rectangle of corn. Sometimes there was a brownie hiding in the corner. It was a plastic tray of small comforts. The sound of that plastic film peeling back after the microwave dinged was almost ceremonial. You sat cross-legged on the carpet, TV glowing, fork in hand. The meat may have been spongy and the potatoes from a powder, but in the moment, it tasted like everything you needed. This was independence for a generation raised on fast solutions. Your parents were busy, you were hungry, and this box from the freezer aisle gave you a meal and a few minutes of peace. The packaging always promised home style, but really, it was its own thing. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives. But the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? In households where every drop of bacon grease was saved in a tin on the stovetop, nothing went further or lasted longer than a batch of old-fashioned grease gravy and bread. Made from little more than rendered fat, flour, and water or milk if it was available, this dish was the very definition of survival cooking. There was no seasoning standard, no culinary flair, just the basic alchemy of turning scraps into sustenance. The bread, often stale or just a day from it, served as the vehicle. Poured hot over slices or biscuits, the gravy transformed even the driest crusts into something warm, filling, and deceptively comforting. You didn't need recipes, you needed instincts. Stir too long and it burned, stir too little and it lumped. But get it just right, and you had a meal that could feed a family on the flavor of yesterday's breakfast. During the Great Depression and into wartime America, this kind of food was more than economical. It was strategic. Nothing was thrown out, not even fat. Families knew how to stretch a dollar until it screamed, and this dish was the sound it made. Grease gravy and bread wasn't elegant or exciting, but it was practical, reliable, and one of the quiet heroes of frugal American lunches. The mock duck was a substitute dish for duck meat, also made in times like the Great Depression, mostly because duck meat had become such a luxury. There was a type of gluten made out of wheat known as seitan, and you would roll that and stuff it to make this. Conceptually, I think people were trying to mimic duck breasts. You would pan-fry these just like them too, or roast them and serve with any kind of gravy. Now, this doesn't really sound that bad, right? Relatively normal compared to the rest of the nightmares we've been going through. Wrong? It was made of organic meat, or strictly vegetarian ingredients, both of which were really bad at capturing the texture or flavor of duck, or just coming anywhere close to it, really. The only momentum this dish had going for it was that veganism was on the rise thanks to health concerns, overfishing hazards, and environmental damages. People were significantly more excited about real duck meat when it did eventually become affordable and accessible, and most mock food is now left behind in the past. Let's be honest, it was smart, but that doesn't mean it was good. A cold baked bean sandwich is what you think it is. It's just cold. 2 slices of modest bread, a familiar presence in the tomato-based sauce, with a generous spread of baked beans. The flavor is something that's a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy, but it's really just the textures that work here so well. The bread is chewy, but the beans mesh together as soon as you bite into them, and as the little bits of sauce squeezed out when you bite into the sandwich, it all makes for one flavorful bite. Cold baked bean sandwiches were a pretty common go-to lunch meal for people in the middle of the 20th century, especially in American households. This was even more true during the 40s, especially among blue-collar workers. Factory towns would often see people buying as much as canned beans as they could during grocery trips. People had a pretty practical approach to their food during these decades, and while the sandwich had no presentation or flair, it definitely got the job done. And it could do that for you today as well, because this is still as reliable of lunch now as it was back then, especially if you're pressed for time. The first frost came fast in the mountains and killed whatever was still green overnight. Fried green tomatoes were what you made the week before. Every tomato that hadn't ripened, sliced thick, dredged through cornmeal with salt and pepper, and laid into a skillet of hot bacon grease until the outside went golden and crackled, and the inside softened just enough to give. They weren't the romanticized version that arrived in restaurants decades later. They were a practical harvest, a way of eating what would otherwise rot on the vine. The cornmeal crust transformed the chalky bitterness of an unripe tomato into something with texture and heat, and enough fat to feel like a meal. Mountain families in North Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee had done this since the 19th century, using cornmeal ground at the nearest mill. You never added anything fancy to the dredge. The grease had to be hot enough that the slice sizzled the second it touched the pan. If it didn't, you'd waited too long. If you had to ask how hot the grease was, you weren't ready to cook them. Egg foo. Young sandwiches brought a touch of Chinese-American flavor to diner counters during the 1950s, when global influences were just beginning to shape everyday meals. Egg foo young, a Chinese-inspired omelet with vegetables and sometimes meat, was tucked into bread and sold as a sandwich. It reflected America's growing curiosity about international cuisines while still being adapted for local tastes. Diners promoted it as exotic but accessible, serving it alongside fries and coffee for quick lunches. Housewives also tried making simplified versions at home, using leftover vegetables and eggs to recreate the dish in a thrifty way. For children, it was a novelty to taste something so different, while adults appreciated its hearty filling. The Egg Foo Young sandwich showed how immigrant recipes blended into mainstream dining, reshaping what Americans considered lunch food. Its popularity in diners and community cookbooks helped introduce many to flavors they had never experienced before. For mid-century eaters, it was a small step into a wider culinary world without leaving home. It was not chicken, and it never had been. City chicken was cubes of pork and veal threaded onto wooden skewers, breaded, browned in a skillet, and baked slow until the meat went tender enough to pull apart with a fork. The dish came out of Polish and Ukrainian neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Detroit during the Depression, when chicken was a luxury that only farm families could afford and pork scraps were cheap at the butcher counter. By the 1960s, actual chicken had become affordable, but city chicken had already earned its place on the weekly rotation in Great Lakes households. Mothers kept making it because their mothers had made it, and the taste was nothing like real poultry anyway. It was richer, fattier, and the breading held a brown gravy that you spooned over mashed potatoes until the plate was swimming. Butcher shops in Pittsburgh still sold the pre-skewered meat in wax paper packages through the 70s. If you grew up east of the Mississippi and never heard of it, that is exactly the point. This was a dish that belonged to the families who made it and nobody else. Spam and pickle sandwiches were one of those salty, tangy lunches you could whip together before the coffee even finished brewing. You sliced up spam, fried it in a pan, stacked it on soft white bread, and layered pickles over the top, done in under 10 minutes. It was not the prettiest meal, but it was fast, filling, and made with stuff most families already had sitting in the pantry. Spam was practically a food group during the lean years, and those jars of pickles stretched on forever, making this one of the quickest cheap lunches around. Some folks added mustard, lettuce, or even a slice of cheese if they had it, but most just kept it plain. Back then, nobody cared about gourmet ingredients or trendy recipes. Lunch was about survival, and a hot spam sandwich hit the spot when the cupboards were running bare. You would find this recipe scribbled on index cards, stuck in old cookbooks, or just passed along by word of mouth. It might sound like an oddball now, but back then, Spam and pickles were a lunchroom classic that got families through tight days. Methodist meat pie was the practical answer to feeding large crowds economically, stretching small amounts of ground beef into hearty slices that satisfied working families. Church women would brown inexpensive ground beef with onions and simple seasonings, then spread the mixture into large sheet pans lined with homemade biscuit dough. A second layer of dough covered the top before baking until golden, creating individual portions that could be served without plates or forks if necessary. The beauty was in the portability. Men could eat standing in fellowship halls between services. Children could carry portions outside without messes. Each church had its own variations, some adding canned tomatoes for moisture, others folding in leftover vegetables. The pies appeared at Wednesday night suppers, funeral receptions, and building fund dinners where economy mattered more than elegance. A little meat, some flour, and willing hands transformed church basements into places where no one left hungry. Fried green tomato sandwiches were tart, crisp, and practical, born out of the need to use what the frost might ruin. Unripe tomatoes were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in bacon grease until golden. Layered between bread, they made a meal that traveled well and tasted like summer's last stand. Field hands loved them for the crunch, while homemakers loved that nothing from the garden went to waste. They were bright and sharp, the kind of food that woke your tongue after hours in the heat. Some folks added onions or a slice of cheese, but most ate them plain, still warm and oily in paper wrapping. It was a clever dish, built from what could not wait for tomorrow, carrying that same stubborn spirit that kept rural families going year after year. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also known as stuff on a shingle, was a meal built in the trenches that somehow ended up in American cafeterias. It started in the military, a way to stretch dried beef into something resembling sustenance. The beef was salty, thin, and usually shredded beyond recognition. The sauce? A thick white gravy made from flour, milk, and determination. It was poured generously over toast, biscuits, or anything else that could act as a sponge. In school lunches, it arrived in lukewarm plastic trays, never quite hot, never quite cold. Kids either loved it or dreaded it. There was no in-between. It was filling, fast, and had that unmistakable cafeteria smell that followed you into math class. Some parents made it at home, calling it comfort food. Others never touched it again after leaving the service. But for a generation of kids, it was just lunch. A strange, salty, beige experience that somehow stuck around long enough to be missed. Cheesy spinach squares were what you made when you wanted to sneak something green into a potluck plate without getting too many complaints. You would mix chopped spinach, frozen or fresh, with eggs, shredded cheddar cheese, and a little flour and baking powder to bind it all together. Then it was poured into a baking dish, cooked until firm, and sliced into neat little squares. They were good warm or cold, which made them perfect for women's circles, bridal showers, and youth group meetings where you could not count on an oven being available. The flavor was mild but rich, and the texture fell somewhere between a quiche and a savory brownie. These squares were especially loved by the women who brought them because they were just so easy. No crust, no fuss, just a big mixing bowl and a square pan. They showed up in dozens of church cookbooks from the 1960s and 1970s, often with hand-scribbled notes in the margin like, "Add nutmeg" or "Great with hot sauce." You might not think of spinach as a crowd pleaser, but when it came baked with cheese and egg into a tidy little square, it sure had a way of disappearing fast. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. Quiche Lorraine somehow found its way from French cafes to American kitchens and never looked back. Made with eggs, cream, bacon, and Swiss cheese baked into a pie crust, it was the closest most families got to elegance on a weekday. It showed up at brunches, baby showers, and dinner tables alike. Equal parts savory pie and silky casserole. The bacon brought salt, the cheese brought richness, and the cream made it smooth enough to spoon. This was a dish that made leftovers feel fancy. Leftover crust? Use it. Bits of bacon? Toss them in. Quiche Lorraine was forgiving and flexible, but it always looked like you tried. That was the secret. It felt refined without being complicated. Your mother could make it while balancing a phone call and homework help. It slid onto the table golden and steaming, and everyone got a slice. No fuss. Just quiet satisfaction. In the 1980s, it became shorthand for sophistication on a budget. It may have started in Paris, but by then, it lived in Pyrex. Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Speedafests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. Frog leg fricassee was this stewed dish that would involve frog legs that had really just been browned lightly in butter. They were simmered in a really creamy sauce too, with wine, onions, garlic, and herbs. Doesn't sound bad, right? I'm sure a sizable amount of us have gone fishing for frogs, maybe even eaten a few in our lifetimes. At least our older viewers might be able to relate. The idea was basically that you would saute meat and stew it in this white sauce, and then you would use seasonings as per your taste. Most people kept it aromatic and herbal, but there were people who tried different spice rubs as well, typically in the South and Midwest. Wild frogs also used to be abundant in rural America in general, and a lot of people just thought they were a really convenient source of protein. Frog legs were still something that French and Cajun communities ate occasionally, but many people thought it was very off-putting. Besides, amphibians are usually seen as weird. It's not the kind of meat people are used to eating. They're not even farmed that much in the United States. It's not seen as exotic, quirky, trendy, or experimental. It's just odd and strange to people, which is a big part of why frog legs fell off. You have no idea the damage bad social perception can deal to a recipe's lifespan. Beef dripping toast is pretty much entirely nostalgic comfort food. Let me run you by a typical dripping-based toast. You take some thick slices of crusty bread, which ideally should be warm or toasted, but will work with whatever the day gives us. You slather on some beef drippings and some salt, pepper, malt vinegar, and whatever else you really like on your toast, and you're good to go. Beef drippings are just the rendered fat from roasts, and most of the time they still have the little browned jelly bits mixed in with the toast. As far as flavors go, you want to imagine a deep umami with a real buttery richness. Something that hits like a cozy blanket on a cold day. It's almost as if toast and your regular 20th century Sunday roast had an incredibly greasy baby meant for breakfasts. Beef dripping toast wasn't just popular in America with the working class. It was the same deal in Britain, and it was served for, honestly, any meal of the day. Dirty cheap, really filling, and something that takes about 15 minutes to prepare? Yeah, nobody was going to be letting go of this recipe anytime soon. Cushaw was a hillbilly squash that most of the country never heard of. a large, crook-necked, cream and green-striped gourd that grew heavy on the vine in Appalachian gardens from Virginia down through Georgia, one of the few crops robust enough to thrive in Rocky Mountain soil. Its roots went deeper than European settlement. The Cherokee had been cultivating cushaw for centuries before Scots-Irish settlers arrived, and those settlers learned to grow it from the people who already knew, the same way they learned corn and beans. Sliced thin and laid into a hot skillet with butter and a sprinkle of brown sugar, it cooked fast, the sugar caramelizing at the edges, the flesh going soft and sweet and slightly stringy in a way that butternut or acorn squash never managed. Appalachian food writer Ronnie Lundy, in her James Beard award-winning cookbook Victuals, described cushaw as tied to mountain memory in a way that nutritional language alone cannot hold. The Foxfire Fund in Mountain City, Georgia, still works to preserve heirloom crops like cushaw, but the women who knew the exact moment to pull it from the pan are mostly gone. Cottage cheese and tomato slices were a mid-century staple that fit perfectly into the light lunch trend of the 1950s. Served on a plate, cottage cheese was spooned beside thick slices of ripe tomatoes, often sprinkled with salt or pepper. This simple pairing was praised as healthy, refreshing, and inexpensive, especially at a time when calorie-conscious meals were gaining popularity. Housewives prepared it regularly for quick family lunches, and diners featured it as part of their lighter menu options. The dish carried a wholesome image, with cottage cheese advertised as a protein-rich food perfect for modern families. Tomatoes were plentiful thanks to home gardens and post-war distribution, making the combination easy to prepare year-round. It offered nourishment without heaviness, which was especially appealing during warmer months. Many remember eating cottage cheese and tomatoes on hot afternoons when lighter meals were welcome. This dish reflected both practicality and a growing focus on health, qualities that made it a favorite across American households and lunch counters alike. Scalloped corn was the dish that traveled, to church suppers, to funeral dinners, to the neighbor's house when a new baby arrived. Your mother made it in a glass baking dish with 2 cans of cream-style corn, a sleeve of crushed saltine crackers, a couple of beaten eggs, a pour of milk, and enough butter to make the top go golden and crispy in the oven. Some women added diced onion, others stirred in a can of whole kernel corn for texture. In the Midwest, where the dish was strongest through the 1950s and 60s, every woman at the potluck brought her own version, and every version was slightly different, and nobody shared exactly how they made theirs. The recipe was never written down because it did not need to be. 2 cans, crackers, eggs, milk, butter, bake until set. It was the dish that showed up when somebody needed feeding, and the empty pan that came back was the only compliment anyone required. Peanut butter and lettuce sandwiches were the strange little lunch you would not believe unless you grew up eating them. You grabbed a couple slices of soft sandwich bread, spread peanut butter on both sides, and tucked in crisp iceberg lettuce, because that is what most families had in the fridge. It sounds like a bad joke now, but it was crunchy, creamy, and surprisingly filling. That is why so many old cookbooks recommended it for kids' lunchboxes and quick snacks. Some adventurous folks added raisins or sliced bananas, but most stuck with plain lettuce and peanut butter when time was short and the pantry looked empty. It was quick, weird, and stretched every last bit of food when grocery runs were few and far between. You did not have to love it, but chances are if you were around back then, you definitely remember it. Sawmill gravy with cathead biscuits was the working-class breakfast that fueled Sunday mornings before church across the Appalachian South. The gravy earned its name from lumber camps where cooks stretched meat drippings into filling meals for hungry workers, using flour and milk to create thick white sauce flecked with bits of sausage or bacon. Cathead biscuits, so called because they were large as a cat's head, were dropped onto baking sheets without rolling, resulting in irregular shapes with crusty tops and soft interiors, perfect for soaking up gravy. Church kitchens adopted this combination for fellowship breakfasts, with women arriving before dawn to mix biscuit dough and heat cast-iron skillets. The smell of frying sausage and browning flour drew families from parking lots into basement dining rooms where long tables waited. Men would pile their plates high, knowing the gravy would carry them through 3-hour services. This was food that honored labor and simplicity. Potato cakes from leftover mash were the quiet heroes of mountain kitchens. You mixed yesterday's mashed potatoes with flour, salt, and maybe an egg if you had one, then fried them in lard until the edges turned crisp. They were soft inside and golden outside, wrapped in cloth to stay warm for the noontime break. Whether eaten with onions or just plain, they were the kind of food that filled the stomach and felt familiar. They started as supper leftovers but became a comfort in their own right, passed from hand to hand in lunch tins and brown paper. Nothing fancy, just good sense and good flavor. Every family had their way of making them, but they all shared the same goal, stretching a meal into tomorrow. Braunschweiger sandwiches were the dark horse of childhood lunches. Wrapped in wax paper and made with a spreadable meat that looked like wet clay, they were both feared and weirdly respected. Braunschweiger, for those who did not know, was liver sausage, soft, salty, and undeniably pungent. It spread like butter and smelled like your grandpa's hat closet. But it had a following, a small, loyal following. Kids who grew up in German households or with parents who loved real food swore by it. Served on rye bread, with mustard or onions if your parents were brave, it was the kind of lunch that made your classmates take a step back. You did not trade this sandwich. You defended it. You ate it with confidence. Or you tried to. The taste was overwhelming, but it stuck with you, literally and figuratively. No one could ever spell it, but everyone remembered it. It was the kind of lunch that made you grow up a little faster. And maybe, just maybe, miss it a little when it was gone. Eggplant hamburger pie was what happened when church ladies leaned into garden vegetables and budget beef at the same time. You would slice the eggplant thin and use it like a crust or a layer inside a pie dish, then spoon in a seasoned mix of ground beef, onion, and tomato. Some versions added breadcrumbs or a little shredded cheese on top before baking. The end result was something between a casserole and a meat pie, rich, saucy, and surprisingly light. Eggplant was never the star of church dinners, but in the right hands it carried a lot of weight. It was cheap, it soaked up flavor, and it came straight from backyard gardens during summer months. This dish was especially popular in regions with Italian or Greek congregations where Mediterranean cooking naturally found its way into church kitchens. But even in Midwest cookbooks, eggplant hamburger pie made appearances as a clever, meat-stretching recipe that helped families get through a week. It was earthy and satisfying, not too heavy, and it gave women a reason to use what they had grown without spending extra. For families who did not eat out much, this was as close as it got to something special. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was the definition of classic comfort, a slab of ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and egg, then topped with a thick sweet glaze of ketchup and brown sugar. It sat in a loaf pan, sizzling as the glaze caramelized in the oven, sending out smells that filled every corner of the house. It was never flashy, but it never needed to be. This was the kind of supper that could stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal for 6. Every slice was the same, moist, tender, and sticky on top. Some families added Worcestershire or mustard, others swore by keeping it simple. Either way, it was a permanent fixture of the 1980s dinner table. It was dependable, it was nostalgic, and it somehow got better the next day in a sandwich with a slice of white bread. Parents loved it because it was easy. Kids loved it because the glaze was basically candy, And even picky eaters found something to like. In an age of frozen meals and fast food, this was a hot meal that said someone still had time to care. There was a time when even leftovers got a second life. Not out of trend, but out of sheer necessity. That's how oatmeal patties found their way onto lunch tables across Depression-era America. Cold, sticky bowls of morning oats didn't get tossed. They got transformed. Mixed with a bit of flour, a chopped onion if you had one, and maybe an egg if the chickens were feeling generous, yesterday's porridge became today's pan-fried meal. This wasn't about flavor complexity or visual appeal. It was about not going hungry. Survival and simplicity went hand in hand, and no one was above crisping up congealed oatmeal to stretch a food budget. If you could get them golden brown without them falling apart, you were considered a culinary genius. Some added ketchup, others added a little salt. Either way, lunch was served, and the stove got a workout. There were no cookbooks praising the virtues of fried oatmeal, but that didn't stop families from making it part of their weekly routine. The ingenuity behind oatmeal patties was less about invention and more about adaptation. You didn't need a recipe. You needed heat, patience, and the kind of determination that makes you fry breakfast twice. It may not have been anyone's favorite, but it filled stomachs and bought time. And that was enough. Spam and lima bean casserole is every bit the atrocity it sounds. And it's one of the worst things we've ever done as a country with Spam. A salty and processed pork product that was supposed to make life a lot more convenient for everyone wasn't supposed to be used like this, and I'm glad we can agree with that. Mostly. The middle of the 20th century was a scary time because it was wrought with economic strife. Your neighbor could genuinely ruin your entire week with one of these, especially because this was supposed to be a budget-friendly meal for families. Lima beans, cream sauce, and breadcrumbs or cheese. Who could possibly think that was a good idea? Spam just used to be so available that people were making anything. And the middle of the 20th century was also a time when casseroles were slowly reviving and fusion food was slowly beginning to take off too. But this isn't the direction you go in, and I'm glad people left this in the last century. It's still not as bad as the next one, though. Cornbread and buttermilk is pretty much as Southern as it gets. It's something that's completely a classic comfort food of the South. And cornbread is something that has a deeply rich history in that region anyway, almost as rich as the flavor. Especially when you pair it with sweet, sweet buttermilk. Cornbread is this crumbly bread that's made with cornmeal if you didn't already know. People would typically just have it ready in a cast iron skillet so that it would get those nice little crispy edges that you all love so much. You pair that up with buttermilk, and it adds an entirely new level of richness and texture to the dish that just wasn't there before. Cornbread and buttermilk is a combination that's deeply rooted in Southern culinary traditions. This goes all the way back to the Native American tribes that first taught European settlers how to harvest and cultivate corn and really take advantage of it. The Southern version didn't get its start in life until after the Civil War, which is when cornmeal started to become more widely used, mostly because it was affordable again. Fried cabbage cost almost nothing. A full head fed a family of 5, and the only other ingredient was salt pork, which was the cheapest cut at the smokehouse or the company store. You shredded the cabbage coarse, got the skillet hot, laid the salt pork in until it colored, then added the cabbage all at once and covered the pan long enough for steam to wilt it. Then you took the lid off and let the water cook out until the edges browned at the bottom of the pan. The pinch of sugar was the secret, not enough to taste sweet, just enough to pull the natural sugars out of the cabbage and help it caramelize, and the women who knew this never needed to say it out loud because they had learned it by watching. In Depression-era Appalachia, cabbage was one of the few vegetables that grew cheap and reliable in Rocky Mountain soil, and fried cabbage with side meat appeared on supper tables across West Virginia and Virginia coal country 3 and 4 nights a week without anyone considering it hardship. It tasted like something made with care. It was. Cold spaghetti sandwiches were a frugal trick that turned dinner leftovers into portable lunches. Housewives discovered that leftover spaghetti, often dressed in tomato sauce, could be pressed between slices of bread and sent to school or work the next day. It was unusual but practical, using what was already available rather than wasting food. Children sometimes looked at it with skepticism, But once they tasted the chewy noodles inside soft bread, it became another familiar memory of mid-century kitchens. Adults valued it because it required no cooking and stretched the grocery budget. In immigrant households, particularly Italian-American ones, this sandwich was an easy way to enjoy pasta outside of dinner time. It reflected the wider American habit of repurposing food creatively during the 1950s, when frugality and efficiency still shaped daily cooking. For many families, the cold spaghetti sandwich was a symbol of practicality, reminding them that no meal was ever wasted. It may seem odd today, but it carried families through. She browned a pound of ground beef in the big skillet, spooned off most of the grease but not all of it, because that fat was the flavor, and then shook flour over the meat until the whole pan went thick and pasty. Milk went in next, slow, stirred constantly, and what came together was a rich, peppery gravy that clung to every grain of the instant rice she spooned onto the plates. Hamburger gravy over rice was the meal that appeared when the grocery money was running thin, but there were still mouths to feed. In some houses, it went over mashed potatoes, in others over toast. But the skillet technique was the same everywhere. Brown, flour, milk, stir, no broth, no wine, no stock from a carton. Just the drippings, the flour, and whatever milk was in the door of the refrigerator. The whole supper cost pennies and filled a kitchen with the smell of something that felt like enough. Some mothers added a can of cream of mushroom soup to stretch it further, and nobody ever complained. Cottage cheese and canned peach plates were the no-cook lunch that showed up every time the stove was off limits or the heat outside was too much to bear. You scooped a mound of cottage cheese onto your plate, opened a can of peach halves, arranged them neatly, and called it lunch. Maybe you added a lettuce leaf underneath to make it look fancy, but nobody was fooling themselves. It was all about speed and simplicity. Diet cookbooks from the 1970s praised this plate as a light, protein-packed option that took barely 5 minutes to make. It was weirdly filling, cold, and refreshing, especially when summer kitchens felt like ovens. You could spot this combo everywhere, from lunch counters to school cafeterias, with old diner menus proudly listing it as the fruit and cottage cheese plate. It might not sound like much today, but back then, this quick plate was a lifesaver when groceries were tight and cooking felt like a chore. Ham loaf with pineapple glaze was the dressed-up main dish that churchwomen prepared when occasions demanded something fancier than everyday suppers allowed. Ground ham mixed with ground pork, breadcrumbs, eggs, and milk was shaped into loaves, then baked under a sticky sweet glaze of brown sugar, mustard, and crushed pineapple. The combination of salty, smoky ham with tropical sweetness created a flavor profile that felt celebratory, perfect for Easter dinners and homecoming suppers. The glaze caramelized as it baked, creating glossy surfaces that made modest ingredients appear festive. Church kitchens made multiple loaves simultaneously, feeding congregations of 100 or more from dishes that required only grinding, mixing, and patience. What made ham loaf meaningful was how it elevated everyday ingredients into celebration food through technique and presentation rather than expense. Families requested ham loaf for special birthdays, knowing its appearance signaled that the event mattered. Vinegar pie slices were a forgotten miracle of thrift, bright, tangy, and sweet all at once. When lemons were scarce and fresh fruit out of reach, mountain cooks made do with vinegar, sugar, and eggs to create something that tasted every bit as fine. The filling baked into a glossy custard with a soft, buttery crust that held its shape even in the summer heat. It needed no refrigeration, no fancy ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Wrapped in wax paper or newspaper, slices went into lunch pails beside coffee jars and biscuits. The first bite was sharp and surprising, but by the second, the vinegar's sting mellowed into a warm, caramel-like sweetness. It was a pie that aged gracefully, growing richer over time, a small reward for those who worked hard and wasted nothing. It became a staple of mountain kitchens, a quiet symbol of resourceful living. What began as imitation lemon pie turned into something uniquely its own, humble yet elegant in its simplicity. Vinegar pie proved that flavor could come from imagination, not luxury, and that even in lean years, Sweetness could still find its way to the table and make life a little softer. Vienna sausages and saltines were not a meal. They were a dare. Tiny pink tubes floating in mystery juice, packed into a can that hissed when you opened it, like it knew it was about to be judged. You would drain them, maybe pat them dry, and line them up like little soldiers on a stack of saltines. No heat, no fuss, just raw, salty commitment. The crackers softened under the weight of the sausages, sometimes crumbling entirely. But you powered through because this was your lunch, and if you were lucky, there was mustard. Not fancy mustard. Yellow squeeze bottle stuff that cut through the meat-flavored monotony. It was not gourmet, it was survival. A lunch built for kids who knew how to eat without complaining. And maybe, just maybe, you started to like it. Maybe the weirdness became comforting. Like knowing you could always count on something so unapologetically odd to be waiting in your lunchbox. Kids today would never touch them. But back then, they were a rite of passage. Creamed dried beef over rice was a salt-forward spin on a military classic that church cookbooks welcomed with open arms. This version took thin slices of dried beef, sometimes from a jar, sometimes packaged like cold cuts, and simmered them in a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Instead of spooning it over toast, you would ladle it onto hot cooked rice, letting the sauce sink into every grain. It was richer, more filling, and gave the illusion of a meal even when the fridge was close to empty. The recipe came from war rationing and military mess halls but got dressed up for church kitchens and family tables. It was quick, pantry-friendly, and made a little beef go a long way. You could stretch it even more with peas or chopped hard-boiled eggs stirred in, which many housewives did when feeding more than 2 or 3 mouths. It was the kind of meal that said, "We are making do, and we are doing it well." It is mostly forgotten now, but ask anyone who grew up on it, and they will tell you, it really did hit the spot. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil. A dash of salt and you were good to go at basically no cost. Beef stroganoff took a hard left turn in the 1980s, and nobody was mad about it. The hamburger helper version was the most famous, but even homemade versions started borrowing from that quick and easy formula. Instead of strips of steak, you had ground beef. Instead of slow simmering, you had a one-pan, 15-minute meal. The creamy sauce, made from sour cream and mushroom soup or packet mixes, was poured over wide egg noodles and stirred until it looked just right. Thick, glossy, and beige in that oddly comforting way. It did not pretend to be authentic. It just wanted to get dinner on the table. This was a working parent's dream. Minimal prep, affordable ingredients, and flavor that punched way above its weight. Kids loved it. Adults loved it. Even picky eaters could get behind those silky noodles coated in savory cream. If you grew up in the 1980s, this was the taste of a weeknight. The clink of forks on Corelle plates, the hum of a kitchen lit by a single overhead bulb. It was warm, familiar, and deeply satisfying. You hear the name rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? When mayonnaise was in the fridge and saltines were in the pantry, lunch didn't require a trip to the store. It required a little creativity and an open mind. Saltine cracker salad was one of those Depression-era creations that looked like a last resort, but managed to find its way onto picnic tables and kitchen counters more than anyone expected. It combined crushed crackers, chopped hard-boiled eggs, diced tomatoes, and a generous spoonful of mayo, blended together until it held just enough shape to call it a meal. It wasn't about presentation. It was about making sure nothing went to waste. Tomatoes from the garden, eggs from the backyard coop, and crackers that were already going stale became something entirely new. With no oven, no stove, and no fancy tools, it was survival served cold. In fact, some folks called it poor man's potato salad, although it rarely needed the comparison. It held its own just fine. This wasn't a dish you'd find in polished cookbooks, but it was shared by word of mouth and memory, often made in minutes by those who didn't have the time or the ingredients for anything else. Saltine cracker salad was a masterclass in resourcefulness, proving once again that hunger fuels invention and mayonnaise covers a multitude of sins. Spam fritters are also pretty much exactly what you think aren't. They sound like a cutesy dish your wife whips up for you before you come home. But this is actually a wartime dish through and through. Thick slices of canned Spam dipped in batter and then deep fried until they're gloriously golden, pure fish and chip style. The outside is as crunchy and hot as you would expect, and the inside is tender, slightly salty and addictively chewy in the way only Spam can be. The flavor is literally just comfort food. It's slightly smoky, the perfect amount of meaty without being overwhelming, and it balances out with the salty notes. This is a dish that makes no apologies and instead chooses to embrace its greasy nature to give you a taste of nostalgia wherever you are. Spam fritters were something that exploded in popularity during World War II, and meat rationing was still a massive thing. Spam, courtesy of American Lend-Lease supplies, started to become what people were relying on because of how easy it was to work with. It was the working-class answer to the age-old question of, how do we make canned meat something that feels like a proper meal? And Spam fritters stuck around even after the war, too, especially in towns where factory work was a lot more common than any other kind of job. Hey, you might not be fighting a war anymore, but that 9 to 5 is still no joke. Chocolate gravy is exactly the kind of dish that makes people from outside Appalachia raise an eyebrow until they taste it. In Kentucky and Tennessee mountain kitchens, it was made with cocoa powder, flour, sugar, and water. No milk, no butter, cooked until thick and glossy, then spooned hot over biscuits as a supper that was both meal and dessert, and neither one exactly. The recipe spread through families in the Cumberland Plateau, from women who knew that sugar and starch could fill a stomach as surely as any meat, and that children who refused beans for the third night running would eat without complaint if something sweet came with it. The wider food world discovered chocolate gravy in the early 2000s and called it Southern, but it was Appalachian first, specific to these mountains. Every family made it slightly differently, some using milk, some adding butter at the end, some keeping no written recipe at all. When your grandmother stopped making it, the version she made stopped existing, and the distance between her version and every other version closed to nothing. Peanut butter and raisin sandwiches were a practical and slightly playful lunchbox option in 1950s households, made by spreading peanut butter across bread and sprinkling raisins on top. Children loved the chewy sweetness of raisins mixed with creamy peanut butter, a pairing that felt like a treat even though it was inexpensive. Parents liked it because it required no cooking and delivered protein along with natural sugars. When raisins were added to peanut butter spread on celery sticks, the snack was nicknamed ants on a log, but on bread, it became a filling lunch. The sandwich was simple enough for children to make themselves, adding to its popularity as a staple of after-school snacks. Raisins stored well in the pantry and were cheaper than jams or jellies, making them a thrifty choice. The peanut butter and raisin sandwich carried the same spirit of ingenuity seen across 1950s kitchens, where stretching simple staples created memorable meals. For those who grew up with it, the taste still sparks nostalgia for school lunch tables and childhood afternoons. If you told someone today that your mother baked a cake with a can of Campbell's tomato soup, they would look at you like you had lost your mind. But in the 1960s, tomato soup cake was a real thing that real women made and real families ate after supper on a Wednesday. The recipe had been circulating since the Depression, when Campbell's printed it on the label to sell more soup, and it worked because the tomato gave the cake a warm, spiced flavor, not unlike carrot cake. Moist, dense, with a sweetness that came from the sugar in the soup itself. Most mothers added cinnamon, cloves, and raisins, then finished it with cream cheese frosting, and if you did not know the secret ingredient, you would never have guessed. The cake doubled as a supper dessert, something sweet to end a cheap meal on a full note. It vanished when convenience cake mixes made from scratch baking feel unnecessary, and with it went one of the strangest and most satisfying tricks the American kitchen ever produced. Tomato soup with soda cracker crumble was the poor man's lunch that somehow managed to feel warm, filling, and familiar without draining your pantry. You heated up canned tomato soup on the stove, crushed soda crackers over the top, maybe added a little pepper, and lunch was done in under 10 minutes. It was cozy, simple, and showed up in almost every household because it used staples that were always around. Kids loved smashing the crackers into the bowl. Parents loved how it stretched one can of soup into something that could actually fill a belly. This was the lunch for snow days, sick days, or those afternoons when the fridge was bare and dinner still felt far away. The recipe popped up in every thrift store cookbook, always listed under quick meals or lunches for a crowd. Some families added milk or a pat of butter to make it richer, but most kept it plain and fast. It sounds basic now, but for families scraping by in the 1960s or 1970s, this little soup was a warm reminder that simple food could still get the job done. Chess pie was the simple custard dessert that appeared at nearly every church supper across the South, made from ingredients every pantry already contained. The filling required only butter, sugar, eggs, and a splash of vinegar or buttermilk to create a silky custard that set firm when baked in a flaky crust. Some versions added cornmeal for texture, others a touch of vanilla, but the base remained remarkably consistent across generations and congregations. Churchwomen could make chess pie blindfolded, measuring by memory rather than recipe, producing dozens for homecoming dinners and revival suppers. The pie's name remains debated. Some claim it came from pie chests where desserts were stored, others from the phrase "just pie" spoken with a southern drawl. What made chess pie essential was its democracy. Every family could afford the ingredients, every cook could master the technique. The golden top would crack slightly as it cooled, revealing custard beneath that tasted of nothing but pure, honest sweetness. Apple stack cake slices were the mountain answer to store-bought sweets, and they lasted long enough to pack for lunch. Layers of molasses cake were stacked with cooked-down dried apples that had been mashed into a thick jam. You wrapped it tight in wax paper, and by noon the cake had softened and the apple filling had settled deep into every layer. These slices were never fancy, but they were the closest thing to dessert most folks saw during a workday. They carried the taste of fall orchards and wood stoves even when eaten under the summer sun. If you were lucky enough to get one in your pail, it was probably made by a grandmother who measured sweetness by memory, not spoons. The sugar was scarce, the flour stretched thin, but the effort behind it was rich. It was a small comfort after long hours in the field or at the mill, reminding everyone that even in lean times, there was room for something kind and homemade. Bacon-topped tomato pie was one of those strange little miracles that somehow felt fancy and frugal all at once. At its core, it was sliced tomatoes, sometimes fresh from the garden, sometimes canned, layered into a pie crust with mayonnaise, shredded cheese, and a touch of onion. On top went a lattice or crumble of bacon, the kind you saved and froze in wax paper until you had enough. Then it baked until everything melted together in a warm, bubbling mess that smelled like Sunday supper. This dish was especially beloved in Southern church cookbooks, where tomatoes were plentiful and bacon was considered a sacred ingredient. Women's auxiliaries made it for luncheons, potlucks, and summer picnics when it was too hot to cook anything heavier. It walked the line between a side dish and a main course, good enough to carry a meal if needed. Sometimes it had biscuit crusts, sometimes store-bought dough, but it always had that creamy, salty sweet thing going for it. It might not have looked elegant on the plate, but people went back for seconds. That was usually all the proof a church lady needed to call it a hit. When it comes to sandwiches, only a few were as satisfying as the roast beef sandwich. So, many sandwiches were originally created as a clever way to repurpose leftovers, and this one was no exception. Roast beef sandwiches often started with leftovers from Sunday dinner. The Sunday roast was a time-honored tradition, and any extra beef was used to make delicious sandwiches for lunch the next day. In 1900, the dish was described by the Washington Post as unattractive and as a tired ark in a gravy flood. However, it gained popularity in the coming years when Grandma decided to take matters into her own hands, and by 1931, some critics even went as far as to describe it as a true taste of South Dakota. The bread for Grandma's roast beef sandwich was often homemade, and boy did she know how to dress it up. Whether it was a dollop of horseradish sauce, a spread of mustard, or a smear of mayonnaise, Gram knew exactly what it needed, and if we got lucky, she even snuck in a slice of cheese. Chicken and rice. Bake with cream of mushroom soup was the casserole that cooked while you did anything else. Dump a few boneless chicken breasts into a baking dish. Add white rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and some water or broth. Stir, cover, bake. That was it. The rice soaked up all the flavor from the soup and the chicken, turning soft and creamy while the top browned just enough to give it texture. You would take off the foil and suddenly, dinner was ready. It did not ask for attention. It just quietly got the job done. If your parents worked long hours, this was the kind of meal that waited patiently in the oven. It was never flashy, but it was always there. It fed everyone at the table, left you full, and saved your family from another night of fast food. Chicken and rice bake was not about bold flavors or eye-catching colors. It was about consistency. It was about stretching a few cans and a handful of rice into something warm and whole. And somehow, it always worked. I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was, but what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? In kitchens where meat was scarce and pennies were stretched thin, a pot of boiling cabbage wasn't a side dish, it was the entire meal. Add a few scoops of seasoned cornmeal and you had a working man's lunch known as boiled cabbage and cornmeal dumplings. This wasn't about taste indulgence, it was about filling bellies with what the land, or the ration book, could afford. Cabbage was hearty, cheap, and lasted for weeks. Cornmeal, even cheaper, was a southern staple that could morph into dumplings with just water and salt. You didn't need cookbooks, you needed a pot, a stove, and the kind of intuition only experience teaches. Families would often toss in a ham bone if one was around, not for meat, but for flavor. The goal wasn't gourmet, it was nourishment. The dumplings, dense and plain, soaked up the cabbage broth like sponges, turning bland into bearable. In tough times, bearable was enough. There's a special kind of ingenuity in turning boiled leaves and cornmeal into a lunch that could carry you through a long afternoon of labor. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't delicate, but it was dependable. Boiled cabbage and cornmeal dumplings didn't just feed people, They reminded them that resilience often comes served in a bowl, steaming hot and seasoned with thrift. When meat was missing from the table and vegetables were in short supply, you turned to the one thing that could still make your eyes water: onions. Honestly, I think oyster and prune stew is one of the least offensive ones here. It's an unusual combination, that's for sure, but that doesn't make it as much of a menace to society and culture as liver and banana casserole. This had briny, salty oysters mixed in with really sweet and stewed prunes. I can imagine what the idea was and what kind of vibe they were going for, but I think the execution failed the dish. The dish was really trying to take after some European-influenced cuisine, as you can probably tell by the fact that the broth was made with cream, butter, and usually French wine. Oysters were really cheap back in the 1800s and even in the early 20th century, and they were a staple meal for coastal communities like we talked about. Prunes were also something people genuinely loved and paired with meats often enough. European cuisine was slowly taking over American kitchens as more and more people wanted to experiment and try it out for themselves. The pieces were all set. You just had to put it in motion, but once people did, they realized this wasn't actually that good of a combination. It clashed too much with the sweetness of the prunes instead of contrasting it. Plus, overfishing meant oysters were generally being consumed less thanks to pressure from governments and environmental groups. Prunes had a fine reputation, but they were a side to steaks and stuff. The egg and cress sandwich is literally so perfect yet basic that it makes no sense this dish ever faded into the sidelines. Hard-boiled eggs get chopped up and mixed with mayonnaise or butter before they're topped with a generous serving of cress between 2 slices of soft white bread. This is an egg salad if I've ever heard of one, and the creamy richness of it combined with the peppery crest makes for a refreshing, zingy bite that really knocks you into the present moment. Egg and cress sandwiches are something you would consider British, right? Just off of the vibes? You'd be smart to assume that. This sandwich was a really popular choice in the middle of the 20th century, especially because after World War II, rationing might have eased up. But that doesn't mean that meat became widely available overnight. These days, egg and cress sandwiches are just a retro memory, but they used to be the ideal lunch to take to work or school. Red-eye gravy required exactly 2 things: country ham and black coffee, the stronger the better. You fried the ham, pulled it out, poured a cup of dark coffee over the hot drippings, and scraped the browned bits loose as it hissed. 3 minutes. Done. Some people in Appalachia called it red sop, and the name came from the reddish ring the coffee and fat left at the skillet's edge, darker on the outside, lighter in the center, like an eye. Country ham had been a staple in Virginia and the Mountain South since colonial times, and the tradition of deglazing ham drippings with coffee likely came from Scots-Irish settlers who wasted nothing and never saw a reason to change. You poured it over grits or biscuits, and the bitterness of the coffee cut the salt and fat in a way that shouldn't have worked, but absolutely did. But the quick suppers didn't end with ham. Beneath all that smoky pork lay a whole world of mountain resourcefulness, where garden scraps and foraged food and vegetables nobody else wanted carried as much weight as any cut of meat. Peanut butter and carrot sandwiches were a thrifty invention that brought both crunch and sweetness to the familiar spread. Housewives shredded carrots finely and mixed them with peanut butter, creating a filling that was cheap, colorful, and surprisingly nutritious. It stretched the peanut butter further, which was important in years when groceries had to last. Children sometimes found the taste unusual, but many grew to enjoy the texture and sweetness that carrots added. Packed into lunchboxes, this sandwich carried both protein and vitamins without the expense of meat or jam. It was also quick to make, requiring nothing more than a knife, grater, and a loaf of bread. In many households, carrots were always on hand, whether fresh from a garden or bought cheaply at the market. The peanut butter and carrot sandwich reflected the creativity of 1950s kitchens, where simple substitutions made food more interesting and economical. For many, it remains a memory of school lunches and the ingenuity of mothers who stretched every ingredient into something filling. Nobody in your mother's kitchen had ever been to Spain, but Spanish rice showed up on the table at least twice a month anyway. A one-skillet supper that required nothing more than ground beef, a green pepper, an onion, a cup of rice, and a can of tomatoes. She browned the beef first, drained most of the fat, then added the chopped vegetables and let them soften before the rice and tomatoes went in. A lid, 20 minutes on low heat, and the rice absorbed everything until each grain was stained red and swollen with flavor. Betty Crocker published a version in her 1961 cookbook that called for a teaspoon of chili powder, which most mothers either ignored or doubled depending on how their husbands felt about heat. The dish had no real connection to Spanish cuisine. The name came from the tomatoes, which somebody decades earlier had decided made anything Spanish. You ate it with a glass of milk and a slice of buttered bread on the side, and you did not ask questions about the name. Cheese dreams were the open-faced, melty sandwiches that turned plain old white bread into lunch in under 10 minutes. You laid out a slice of bread, topped it with American cheese, and stuck it under the broiler until bubbly and browned. If you had extras lying around, you could throw on a tomato slice or a strip of bacon, but most folks kept it simple. Cheese dreams popped up in every old-school cookbook as a lifesaver for hungry kids, rushed workdays, or weekends when grocery shopping had not happened yet. It was one of those lunches that made the most of cheap pantry basics, but still felt warm and filling. The cheese bubbled up golden and gooey, the edges of the bread crisped up just enough, and lunch was done before you even had time to set the table. Families loved it because it tasted good, cost next to nothing, and required zero effort. It was one of those old-fashioned meals that looked like a shortcut but stuck around because it simply worked when time and money were both tight. Chicken and pastry was the Appalachian answer to chicken and dumplings, featuring flat strips of dough instead of fluffy biscuit rounds floating in rich chicken broth. Churchwomen would roll pastry thin as paper, cut it into irregular strips, and drop them into pots where whole chickens had simmered until the meat surrendered from the bones. The pastry absorbed broth as it cooked, becoming silky and tender while thickening the liquid into something between soup and stew. This dish stretched one chicken to feed 20 people, making it the practical choice for church suppers where budgets were tight but expectations high. Families brought their largest pots, and women who made the best pastry earned quiet reputations that followed them for decades. What made chicken and pastry special was its texture. Those slippery ribbons of dough coating your mouth with chicken flavor, the broth rich with rendered fat. This was comfort food that required skill, patience, and understanding of how simple ingredients transformed. Cold biscuit sandwiches with molasses or fatback were the kind of lunch that got a man through a 12-hour day with nothing but grit and habit to lean on. The biscuits were always cold by the time the tin lunch pail opened, but that did not matter much. If there was molasses in the pantry, you spread it thick for sweetness. If there was only fatback, you tucked in a slice or two for salt and smoke. The biscuits themselves were usually baked from leftover dough at dawn, made tough enough to hold together through a morning in a jacket pocket. By noon, the edges had gone soft, and the smell of lard or syrup made the whole meal feel like home. These sandwiches were a bridge between the breakfast table and the next hard stretch of fieldwork, something made from what little you had but worth every bite. Each one carried a taste of someone's kitchen, and even in its plainness, it was love in its simplest form, wrapped in wax paper and patience. Tuna noodle casserole leftovers were not made for lunchboxes, they just ended up there. The night before, it was dinner, steaming, bubbly, topped with crushed potato chips or breadcrumbs if your family was fancy. But by lunch the next day, it was cold, compact, and stuffed into a square Tupperware container with a lid that never quite sealed. The smell was unmistakable. One whiff, and everyone in the cafeteria knew what you were working with: tuna, noodles, cream of mushroom soup, maybe some peas, maybe not. It was never pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles fused together into a kind of casserole cake, and you had to hack at it with your plastic fork just to make progress. But somehow, it still tasted like home, like tired parents and scraped-together groceries, and we'll eat this for 2 days straight. You might not have been thrilled to see it in your lunchbox, but you respected it. It was dependable. It was solid. And let us be honest, it was better than a soggy bologna sandwich. Turkey croquettes with gravy were one of those elegant little tricks church ladies knew how to pull off after a holiday dinner. Leftover turkey would be shredded, mixed with a white sauce or mashed potatoes, then shaped into tidy little patties or oblong logs. Some rolled them in cracker crumbs, others used cornflake dust for the coating. Then they were fried to a golden brown and served warm with gravy poured right over the top. These were not everyday meals. They were for after Easter or Thanksgiving, when the bird had been picked clean and the bones had already gone to soup. But nothing went to waste. Not the drippings, not the stuffing, and definitely not the last bits of meat. Church cookbooks from the 1950s and 1960s are full of croquette recipes, especially in regions where thrift and grace went hand in hand. These were also popular with church auxiliary groups and potluck planners who needed something warm, filling, and presentable to serve a crowd. They looked nice on a platter, they reheated easily, and they made a little leftover go a long way. In small towns and church halls, that was always worth something. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was the definition of fun food, half salad, half chaos, and all 1980s genius. The setup was simple. Ground beef cooked with taco seasoning, shredded lettuce, cheddar cheese, maybe some diced tomatoes or sour cream, and a big handful of nacho cheese Doritos. Some families mixed it all in a bowl. Others, the bold ones, served it straight from the bag. You would crunch up the chips, pour in the toppings, shake it up, and dig in with a fork. It was portable. It was messy. It was delicious. And it felt like breaking the rules in the best way. This was dinner that did not sit properly on a plate. It made kids excited to eat salad. It gave busy parents a break. And it tasted like everything good about the 1980s. Salty, cheesy, just a little bit ridiculous. You could call it a meal, a snack, or a party trick. But however it showed up, it never lasted long. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was food with a wink. A name you might not hear very often in the cooking world, as far as French cuisine is concerned at least, is Marie-Antoine Carême, but you can thank her for some amazing dishes such as the vol au vent. This is actually something that got so popularized in American cookbooks in the mid-20th century. In the 1970s, when a national interest in foreign cooking really started popping off in America, there were a lot of trends centered around haute cuisine, and especially things you would find in premium French restaurants. In French-American communities, a vol au vent was a typical Saturday lunch that you would find being served up by your grandmother. Marie-Antoine Carême is a legendary French chef, and a reason she got that acclaim was because she managed to make up dishes that would suit the average household. Vol au vent is actually not really something you'd find at a five-star restaurant or on the upper end of what your wallet could afford. Most people would treat this like a party meal, something to serve at cocktail parties or New Year's ones. It was just puff pastry filled in with chicken, mushrooms, and creamy sauces, but it blended all of those together to make a really warm and earthy taste, which makes it perfectly suited to something you'd associate with your grandma's table. No, very few things on this list are as bad as this one. Liver and banana casserole was definitely an event in American history. You would combine sliced liver with bananas that had been baked in either a creamy sauce or a really savory one, and then some versions even added cheese on top of it. What people would do to convince themselves that this was tolerable was remind themselves of the fact that the liver is a superfood. You can kind of eat healthy if you treat it like any other chore, right? You get lots of good things for time spent doing something you absolutely hate. Typical job experience, right? Not even that kind of practical rationale could help this dish. A lot of people immediately realized this was an absolute catastrophe that should not ever see the light of day. Fair play to them, not every experiment is going to give you lasagna or salmagundi. But this couldn't have possibly come at a worse time. The liver was already in the public eye for its metallic taste and how bold of a flavor it had. But this was just pushing more and more supporters away from the liver fandom. Then again, if that's the price we had to pay to make sure this thing stays dead, then so be it. You had to have some trial and error here first, though, because most people would often make the stew too liquidy on their first try or two, and it would end up spilling over once you unscrewed the lid. Thermos-steeped stew became something of a regional favorite in northern areas where the temperature was really known to drop, and I think it's a cute little dish we could bring back today too. Cold roast beef sandwiches are the perfect example of how less is sometimes more, and this wasn't just more, it was iconic. You've got some juicy roast beef, slice after slice stacked on top of each other, sandwiched between slightly crusty white bread. It's literally a Scooby-Doo snack. The beef is something seasoned with salt, pepper, and a lot of mustard, or horseradish. It's actually something that packs a pretty substantial kick. Now, sometimes people would add a slice of cheddar or Swiss cheese and throw in some fresh vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes. But the star of this show was always that decadent, juicy roast beef that was just thin enough. It had an incredibly satisfying flavor, and it was something that was really just carried by the natural flavors that were already there. No extra work needed. Cold roast beef sandwiches were something that became really common to see in American lunchboxes and deli counters by the early 20th century, especially during and after the wartime era and the Great Depression. It was one of the most economical lunches you could get for yourself, and people really wanted to be spending as little on food as possible, which is pretty different from our mindset today. Bulldog gravy was what you made when there was no meat at all, also called white gravy or milk gravy or just gravy with no qualifier. It started with whatever fat you had, a heaping spoon of flour stirred in until the roux thickened, and then milk or water poured in slow. In Appalachia, the version made with water instead of milk was sometimes called poor gravy, even by the people who ate it, because they knew the difference and they felt it. You poured it over day-old cornbread that had gone dry, and the gravy brought it back to something that could fill a stomach. In Kentucky and West Virginia, mining communities during the Depression, and again during the coal slowdowns of the 1950s and 60s, this was what supper looked like on the worst weeks of the month. Not a figure of speech, just the actual food on the actual table. The children who ate it grew up and moved to cities and never made it again, and some never told their own kids it had existed. Ham and pineapple sandwiches captured the spirit of the tiki craze that swept across America during the 1950s, blending sweet and savory flavors in a way that felt exotic yet accessible. Thin slices of ham were layered with rings of pineapple, often canned, and placed between bread or rolls with mayonnaise. The result was tangy, salty, and slightly sweet, a taste that stood out from the usual sandwiches of the time. Families were fascinated by the idea of tropical flavor, and pineapple became a star ingredient in many mid-century kitchens. The ham and pineapple sandwich reflected this trend, offering a quick way to enjoy something that felt adventurous without costing much. It was common at luncheons, church gatherings, and even in school lunchboxes. Canned pineapple made it affordable and easy to prepare year-round. The combination's popularity endured well past the decade, becoming a hallmark of mid-century curiosity about global flavors. For many, biting into this sandwich was a reminder that even simple lunches could feel like a vacation. The sound of canned salmon patties hitting a skillet of hot butter, that sizzle, that pop of moisture against fat, was one of those kitchen sounds you never forget. A steady, crackling hiss that meant supper was 10 minutes away. Your mother cracked open a tall can of pink salmon, picked through it with a fork to pull out the skin, and mashed the soft bones right in because she said they were good for you, full of calcium. She mixed in a beaten egg, crushed saltine crackers, a squeeze of lemon if there was one, and shaped the patties by hand. Never too thick, never too thin. They fried golden in the skillet, crispy on the outside and soft in the center. And you ate them with ketchup if you were a kid or tartar sauce if you were trying to act grown. The whole meal, salmon patties, canned corn, and instant mashed potatoes, ran about 60 cents in 1963. Every mother had her own ratio of cracker to salmon, and if you asked her how much, she would just say enough. Fried bologna with mustard on toast was the quick stovetop lunch that somehow managed to taste better than it had any right to. You sliced bologna, tossed it in a hot pan, watched it curl up at the edges, and slapped it on toasted bread with a smear of yellow mustard. That was it. Lunch in under 10 minutes. It was salty, tangy, crispy around the edges, and showed up everywhere from lunch counters to kitchen tables when the grocery list was running short. Bologna was cheap, lasted forever in the fridge, and frying it gave it just enough of a glow-up to make it feel like more than sandwich meat. Some folks added a slice of cheese or swapped in rye bread, but the classic stayed simple and fast. Fried bologna with mustard was not glamorous, but it hit the spot when you needed something filling, salty, and satisfying without much effort. It was a staple in school lunchrooms, factory break rooms, and busy homes, sticking around because it was affordable, reliable, and always ready when the clock was ticking. Chicken bog was the great equalizer at church gatherings throughout the Carolina Lowcountry, a one-pot rice dish that could feed a congregation on pennies. The preparation began with a whole chicken simmered until the meat fell from the bones, creating a rich broth that would later cook the rice. Cooks would shred every bit of meat, including the dark pieces most people ignored, then return it to the pot with long-grain rice, onions, and generous black pepper. The dish cooked slowly until the rice absorbed the broth and became sticky, with chicken distributed throughout. What made chicken bog special was its democracy. Every spoonful contained the same humble abundance regardless of who held the plate. Church ladies competed quietly over whose bog had the best consistency. Families brought their largest pots to fellowship halls where the smell of simmering chicken announced that community was about to happen. Sorghum syrup sandwiches were sugar for the poor and fuel for the strong. A thick smear of dark syrup between two biscuits or slices of white bread turned into instant energy for men working fields or hauling timber. Sorghum grew easy in southern soil, and the syrup mills were the heart of many small towns come harvest season. The sandwich itself was sticky and simple, sweetness caught between starch, just messy enough to make it real. It was the kind of food children would sneak before chores, and grown folks would pack for long days when they needed something to push them through. Sorghum was more than a sweetener. It was survival in a jar, and it stayed good for months. The taste was rich, earthy, and honest, a little bitter around the edges, just like life itself. Jell-O salad with shredded carrots was a betrayal that somehow got passed off as a side dish for decades. It looked like dessert and tasted like confusion. Your fork would go in expecting sweetness and come out with carrot bits clinging to neon green gelatin. No one knows who started it. Some say it came from the church potluck crowd. Others swear it was a prank gone too far. Either way, it ended up on cafeteria trays and family tables alike. You could not escape it. Lime Jell-O was the most common offender, but there were worse versions: orange, lemon, and the truly cursed cherry with celery. Moms called it a salad, so you would eat it. But there was no lettuce, no dressing, just the jiggling horror of a dessert that desperately wanted to be a vegetable. It was served with pride, too. People molded it into rings, decorated it with pineapple slices, and acted like it was gourmet. You had to pretend to like it, not out of politeness, but because the grown-ups genuinely thought it was good. It was one of the strangest culinary gaslights of the 20th century. And somehow, it stuck. Creamed chipped ham on biscuits was the unofficial supper of Pittsburgh, and it had a way of spreading from city kitchens to country church cookbooks. It was made by chopping thin slices of deli ham, usually chipped or shredded, then simmering them in a white sauce of milk, butter, and flour. The sauce was ladled over fresh biscuits, toast, or even saltines depending on what was around. It was salty, creamy, and stuck to your ribs in the best possible way. This meal started as a working-class favorite, especially in mill towns and coal country, but it worked its way into church kitchens too. It was cheap, it was easy to scale up, and it made use of inexpensive lunch meat that could be bought by the pound. During busy weeks with lots of evening programs or youth nights, it was the kind of meal that filled a crock-pot and waited patiently until everyone was done rehearsing or cleaning pews. Church ladies appreciated how little it cost and how much it satisfied. It was also one of those dishes that made leftovers feel like something special, especially when paired with sweet pickles or stewed apples on the side. Thanks to all that rage, we got dishes like vegetable aspic cups. See, lots of Americans were coming home to an angry mom, a worried wife, or a dad who just kept saying he wouldn't pay for the doctor's fees when your eating habits would eventually circle back around to bite you. It kind of did set fear into people's hearts, especially since the arguments were so convincing. Who could deny that they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's like addicts back then, or even now? That's why there was this newfound room for fusion food or experimental recipes like vegetable aspic cups. Before, you could tell somebody about vegetables that were set in these tomato-flavored gelatins, and they'd just laugh at you. A chilled salad on top of that? But thanks to how easy convenience food culture had made things, with how you could just buy gelatin and frozen veggies whenever you needed, this was actually a really solid and healthy work lunch option. Lasagna with cottage cheese was the Italian-American supper shortcut that fed every crowd and saved every budget. Ricotta was pricey, cottage cheese way cheaper, and almost always in the fridge, so families layered noodles, red sauce, ground beef, mozzarella, and cottage cheese into thick trays that baked into gooey, bubbling comfort. It was tangier than traditional lasagna, lighter in texture, and surprisingly addictive. The edges would get crispy, the middle would be molten, and the smell could drag anyone out of their bedroom and into the kitchen. Some people swore it was better than the real thing. Others would never admit they used cottage cheese, even if they loved the taste. But in the 1980s, this was the go-to lasagna for busy households that needed big flavor on a tight budget. It showed up at birthday parties, neighborhood potlucks, and Sunday dinners. It was easy to double, easy to freeze, and easy to love. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. In many Southern households, survival didn't come in the form of a hot roast or a fresh deli sandwich. It came cold, sliced, and spread between two pieces of white bread. The liver pudding sandwich was a fixture in lunch pails across the rural South, especially in North Carolina and surrounding areas, where pork was plentiful, but every part had to serve a purpose. Liver, fat, and cornmeal were blended, spiced, and cooked into a loaf that could be eaten warm or chilled depending on the occasion, or more likely, the lack of a working stove. This wasn't food meant to impress. It was food meant to last. Simple, efficient, and high in protein, it could be eaten straight from the fridge, which made it ideal for quick lunches on the farm or in the textile mills. In terms of resourcefulness, it checked every box, nothing wasted, everything used, flavor optional. Some families added mustard for taste, others added prayer. There were no written recipes passed down for liver pudding sandwiches, just a general sense of proportion and a willingness to work with what was available. Tripe and onion casserole was this slow-cooked dish that people made with beef tripe, which was the stomach lining of a cow. I know we've had some really bad casseroles on the list so far, and I genuinely am sorry for exposing you to the evils of our nation. Tripe and onion casserole was really just this slow-cooked dish that incorporated beef tripe with a vegetable butter-based broth. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what tripe is, it's the stomach lining of a cow. As you can probably guess, most of the items on the list are organ meat recipes, and they fell off badly. I've never seen something have a downfall like this. Tripe was readily available, it was practical and inexpensive, and it was also tender. This was one of the few things on the list that didn't have an immediately offensive texture, so there is always that. It still couldn't last in the long run, though, because tripe simply had too much of an aroma that I can only best describe as the scent you would associate with a barnyard. On top of that, the gelatinous texture wasn't something people were down for, and most people would instead just go for normal or better cuts of meat and ration those out according to their budget, rather than bother with recipes like this that just made them feel bad after eating. Corned beef salad sandwiches are a creamy and savory blend of deli-style corned beef. They typically come mixed with your usual suspects. A little bit of mayonnaise here, some mustard there, and if you really want to be extra, some chopped pickles. These get served between sandwich bread in specific, but if you don't have that, any normal white bread will also do. So these actually have a tangier taste than you would think. And to combat that, a lot of people would also use the honey mustard sauce as a substitute for mayonnaise or even pair it up with the mayonnaise. Some versions would also throw in scrambled eggs or shredded lettuce for a better texture that plays with the corned beef itself. This is something that was extremely popular in America during the middle of the 20th century, especially after World War II ended. People were trying to bounce back from the effects of it all, and canned meats really helped save some bucks. It's something you started seeing not just at work, but at school lunches, picnics, and even potlucks, and this was doubly true for the Midwest and different parts of the South. Canned sardine and onion sandwiches were the bold, briny lunches that never pretended to be fancy, but quietly stuck around in old cookbooks for decades. You opened a can of sardines, layered them onto bread, added thin slices of raw onion, and called it lunch. That was it, done in minutes and packing more flavor than most people could handle. It was a Depression-era staple that kept going because sardines were cheap, lasted forever, and gave a salty, filling meal with almost no prep. Some folks added mustard or lettuce, but most kept it plain and sharp. The onions gave crunch and heat, the sardines brought salt and oil, and together, it was the kind of lunch that stuck with you, whether you liked it or not. Families leaned on meals like this because they filled you up when the fridge was empty and the grocery budget was tight. You could find this recipe tucked into old homemaker guides listed under quick lunches or pantry meals. It was strong, weirdly satisfying, and pure old-school practicality on a plate. Persimmon pudding was the autumn dessert that appeared at church harvest suppers when wild persimmons ripened on trees throughout the South and Midwest. Gathering the fruit required patience. Persimmons picked before the first frost would pucker mouths with astringent bitterness. But frost-kissed fruit turned honey-sweet and soft enough to push through sieves. Churchwomen processed the pulp together, sharing labor and gossip while filling mason jars for winter baking. The pudding itself was dense, almost custardy, flavored with cinnamon and nutmeg, baked until the top caramelized while the interior stayed moist. Served warm with cream or cold the next day, persimmon pudding connected congregations to the land and to ancestors who had eaten the same fruit from the same trees for generations. What made persimmon pudding precious was its scarcity, appearing only briefly each year. This was survival knowledge disguised as supper, reminding people that nature provided for those who understood. Poke salad and egg sandwiches were spring's first gift after a long winter's wait. When pokeweed shoots pushed through thawed soil, foragers gathered them young before bitterness set in. The leaves were boiled 3 times to wash away poison, then chopped, drained, and fried in bacon grease until dark and rich. Layered with slices of hard-boiled egg between bread, it became a hearty field lunch, fresh, filling, and full of life. The greens gave a wild tang that spoke of earth and rain, while the eggs brought comfort and weight. It was food born from patience and care, a reward for knowing the land well enough to take only what it offered. In the mountains, such meals weren't poor. They were proof that nature always paid back in flavor and grace. Olive loaf on rye was your mom's attempt at sophistication, whether you asked for it or not. It looked like bologna, until you noticed the green pimento-stuffed olives embedded like some kind of edible mosaic. The meat was pink, the olives were green, and the whole sandwich smelled like a deli had gotten lost in a thrift store. Rye bread made it even fancier, with its dense texture and sharp tang. But kids did not care about fancy. They cared about not getting laughed at, and bringing olive loaf to school was social suicide. Still, it had its defenders. Kids who genuinely liked the odd mix of salty meat and briny olives. Maybe they were ahead of their time. Maybe they just had weird taste buds. Either way, they stood by it. You could find olive loaf in plastic lunchboxes next to Capri Suns and string cheese. It held its own in a world of peanut butter and jelly. It was bold. It was unapologetic. And most of all, it was forgotten. Today, even deli counters hesitate to carry it. But back then, it was a declaration. My mom shops at the nice grocery store. Cornmeal dumplings over stewed tomatoes were the kind of meatless meal that still filled you up and stuck to your bones. You would make the stewed tomatoes first, fresh or canned, simmered down with onion, sugar, and maybe a splash of vinegar for balance. Then you would drop spoonfuls of a cornmeal batter right on top, cover the pot, and let the steam puff them up like little yellow clouds. This was Depression-era food, no doubt about it, but it carried on through the 1940s and 1950s in Southern church kitchens. It was warm, bright, and comforting in a strange way. The cornmeal dumplings were cheap to make and stretched the tomatoes into something hearty enough to count as supper. Church ladies brought it to meatless Monday dinners or served it at home when payday was still a few days off. You would not find steak in a dish like this, but you would find a kind of quiet resilience. Even when cupboards were nearly bare, meals like this proved you could still sit down and feel taken care of. You just needed cornmeal, tomatoes, and a little bit of hope. Croque madames involve layers of melted cheese smothered between freshly baked, crisp white bread. And to top it all off, there's an intense, smoky flavor from the ham. The best part about it is that it takes minutes to make, and it was one of the more fancy dishes that people would create when they were feeling like having a bit of an extravagant dinner. Everyone deserves to treat themselves sometimes, but for home chefs, especially grandparents, the biggest treat is often just seeing everyone eat up every last bite of what they've made. That was never a problem if croque madames were the dish being served, because nobody could resist this classic American sandwich that did more than its fair share of justice to ham. Poached or lightly fried eggs as a topping also made it work a lot better. And by the way, they are called croque madames because the poached eggs seem to resemble women's luxury hats in the 90s. Around the later half of the 20th century, there was this big public paranoia that had spread concerning health and the after effects of the way Americans had been eating. Tuna noodle casserole was either your favorite or your nightmare, but either way, it showed up often and meant you were home. The formula never changed. Egg noodles, canned tuna, frozen peas, and cream of mushroom soup all stirred together and baked until hot and thick. The finishing move? A crunchy crown of crushed potato chips, sometimes cornflakes, always something salty and golden. It came in a square dish that seemed bottomless. You would scoop out a portion and find yourself going back for more because it was weirdly addictive. Cheap, filling, and shelf-stable, it became the undisputed champion of weeknight meals for families trying to stretch $1. Some versions added chopped celery or onion. Others stayed true to the original, built on cans and carbs. It was a casserole that smelled like your grandmother's house. It could feed a family of 6 on pennies. And it tasted like a relic of a time when everything came from the pantry and nobody cared if the tuna was fancy. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners, They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. Cornmeal-crusted fried onions weren't just a side dish. In many homes, they were lunch. Slice a big yellow onion, dredge the rings in seasoned cornmeal, and drop them into a hot skillet of oil or lard. That was the entire recipe, if you could even call it that. It was survival disguised as something that sizzled. The magic of this dish was in its thrift. Onions were cheap, lasted forever, and grew easily, making them a Depression-era staple. Cornmeal, already in every Southern pantry, did double duty as breading and filler. It didn't require eggs, milk, or even refrigeration. Just a good pan and a hot flame. That kind of simplicity was a necessity, not a choice. No one claimed these fried onions were elegant, but they offered crunch, warmth, and enough calories to push through the afternoon. Sometimes they were served alone, other times over bread or next to a spoonful of beans. And while they didn't carry the prestige of meat, they did the job with far less fuss. Cornmeal-crusted fried onions were lunch built from scraps and a little kitchen grit. Sardine whips were a dish that had the texture of a mousse but the taste of canned sardines. Whipped cream, gelatin, and cream cheese can work wonders in terms of texture, but when you throw something like sardines in there, you just ruin the whole thing. The mixture was also whipped to the moon and back until it was as light as a cloud. So, in terms of preparation, I think people did whatever they could to make this appetizing. Unfortunately, nothing can mask the stage-stealing taste of sardines, and I do not use that term in a good way. The fishy taste was way too overpowering for a lot of people, especially Americans who had grown up in the South or in places that did not have any fishing or seafood culture. What seafood people did like was typically grilled, roasted, or just fried. Gelatin-heavy party foods were also falling out of fashion, and those were just too many nails for this recipe's coffin. We're going to start our list off with a plowman's lunch, which is actually a dish best served cold. This little work of art features a lot of sharp cheddar cheese, which definitely makes it a hit with fans of dairy. The next thing that makes a plowman's lunch so zesty and flavorful is pickled onions and a good layer of Branston pickles for safe measuring. Now, all you need is some crusty bread and some hard-boiled eggs, and you pretty much have lunch served. It was more common for people to take things like cold cuts of meat, pork pies, or an apple slice for some variety in the food, but eggs were the one thing you would see non-stop with this dish. It's a pretty well-balanced blend of different flavors. You have a nice little vinegary tang from the pickles, but it doesn't get overwhelming thanks to the cheese helping to cut through all that. Eventually, the cheese mixes really well with the bread, and after it sets and coats the pickles in there, you get an incredibly delicious meal. The tomato gravy started in the bacon grease left from breakfast. A spoon of flour stirred in until the roux turned pale gold, then a quart of home-canned tomatoes dumped in and mashed down with a fork. The whole thing thickened in the time it took to split the biscuits. It wasn't a sauce, it was a gravy, and there's a difference any mountain cook would insist on, because a sauce is something fancy, and a gravy is what you make when supper has to come from the shelf. Families across Kentucky and West Virginia kept canned tomatoes year-round for this dish, putting up 40 or 50 quarts each August so that winter suppers had something red and hot to pour over bread. The trick was the roux. You couldn't rush it, and the women who made this knew the exact moment the flour changed from raw to ready just by the way the skillet smelled. You poured it over biscuits that were already cold, and the gravy brought them back to life. The last jar of tomatoes in February had a different weight to it, and she always said so. Ham and egg salad plates were common on lunch counters and in home kitchens across mid-century America, offering a simple combination of sliced ham and a scoop of creamy egg salad. Served cold, often with crackers or bread on the side, they provided a light yet satisfying meal. Housewives liked it because both parts could be prepared in advance, making it easy to assemble when guests or children needed quick lunches. Egg salad was cheap and hearty, made with boiled eggs, mayonnaise, and sometimes pickles, while ham added a touch of savory protein. Together they created balance, both frugal and appealing. Cafeterias and diners loved serving ham and egg salad plates because they required minimal cooking and used readily available ingredients. For children, it was mild and easy to eat, while adults appreciated its convenience during busy workdays. This dish captured the 1950s approach to lunch perfectly. Affordable, filling, and made from familiar staples that never failed to please. None of these took more than 10 minutes. Leave the one that hit home in the comments.